The 6 to 7 Figure Show, episode 83. Ready? Let's hit it.
Broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun outside Phoenix, Arizona. This is the 6 to 7 Figure Show. Tired of working so hard and having no time? Take your six-figure practice and turn it to a thriving seven-figure enterprise. And now, your host, author, speaker, mentor, and strategist, Frank Bria.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 6 to 7 Figure Show. I'm your host, Frank Bria, and today's episode, we are going to focus on the power of HR. But first, a quick message from our sponsor. This episode of the 6 to 7 Figure Show is brought to you by High Ticket Program. Did you know that you are only 12 projects away from turning your six-figure practice into a thriving seven-figure enterprise? In the High Ticket Program Accelerator, we guide you through every step of growth and scale, a process we call LEAP. Imagine having a world-class project team guiding you and your team through every step of pain-free growth, all with the goal of becoming a seven-figure enterprise and moving away from painful, time-consuming business operations and client delivery. Get a taste of LEAP in your own business by downloading our free high-ticket program core offer Black Book. It contains more than 60 pages of standard operating procedures for your business, including onboarding, customer service, graduation, and financial management, and so much more. You can get that for free by going to the show's homepage, 6to7.show. That's 6to7.show for your free Black Book. I am pleased to introduce today's guest, Anil Saxena. He is a recovering engineer, leveraging over 20 years of intro. I only laugh at that because I introduced myself as a recovering consultant. So recovering engineer, leveraging over 20 years as an internal leader, an external consultant to partner with companies and individuals to enable human resources to leverage the work they do to impact real bottom line organizational results and harness the power of people to make a positive impact on families and communities. Anil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Okay, what kind of engineering? We got to start with that.
So mechanical engineering. So when I grew up, my dad was from India. And if you know, have any friends who have Indian parents, you have really 2 or 3 paths of career. It is, you are a doctor, you are a lawyer, or you are an engineer.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like blood. So I chose engineering.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, no, I can totally sympathize. We've actually had a couple of former engineers on the show, and I really am fascinated by it because it provides a really unique angle. And, you know, my background is actually mathematics, and I studied mathematics and taught mathematics at the university level for a long time. And I did my graduate work and taught at Purdue University, which is a really good engineering school. Yeah. So I've been around a lot of engineers. I'm familiar with the thinking. So engineering to HR, let's talk about that switch. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, and I think it's sort of the premise of my whole approach to work, and the reason that I came up with this whole idea of helping HR organizations really connect their work to driving business results. So I graduated with my mechanical engineering degree. I went out and got an engineering job, and the person who was in charge of the project, so this was the McCormick Place expansion in Chicago, and he said, I want to find out why some of my teams aren't working as effectively as others. And so this was the early 90s, and I wasn't aware of all of this stuff, and found out that it really was the manager that made or broke the team's success. And that just fascinated me. Yeah. And so I decided to pursue that as my career, right? To really kind of dive into that as the way to approach how to make work more effective.
That's great. And who are you working with now? What are the kinds of organizations you're working with?
Well, so mostly I'm working with larger organizations, so probably companies with 200 or more employees. And I'm focusing mostly on either individuals, HR professionals, or teams, and really helping them understand how do they connect the work that they do to driving bottom line business results. And then how do they really roll out initiatives with impact so that they can have impact immediately and they can have lasting impact. And then along the way, we're exploring these 7 key skills that HR professionals of the future are going to need to have in order to be really successful. And so at the end of that, what I'm looking to do is have that person or team have a roadmap to really learning more about those 7 skills, and to be able to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to roll out initiatives with impact so that they can get a seat at the table to driving business results and creating strategy for the organization.
Got it. So are you working with primarily just the HR executives, or are you also sort of touching the managers themselves and the teams that they're doing, that they're overseeing?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
It's definitely HR professionals. That's sort of the sweet spot. But I also work with people leaders, right? Folks that manage people and really helping them to understand, how do we ensure that our human capital is maximized? Because one of the things that I find really interesting nowadays in particular, right? Technology is sort of ubiquitous. So in the early 2000s and the late 90s, technology is what set organizations apart. But now it's really people and how people leverage technology and their ability to innovate. And so if we're not really focusing on that and making sure that we're creating an environment in which people can be successful, then that secret sauce or that superpower that we have as an organization is going to go away. Somebody's going to eat our lunch very, very soon.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a myth among a lot of executives or even professionals that HR is kind of a fluffy, not important. It's just kind of there to CYA kind of thing for organizations. But you talk about human resources executives really driving change, driving efficiency and effectiveness in people. What are some of the things what are some of the myths here that people have about HR folks that they kind of get dismissed all the time, but they actually really have significant power potential in the organization to make change?
And that's a great question. And I think that historically, because of the way that human resources was positioned, it really was a CYA, make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed kind of environment. But now it is so vital that human resources executives and leaders are really embedded in the business and understand how to drive those kinds of business results, because there's this thing called the war for talent, right? There are millions of jobs that are left open because there aren't enough people to fill them. And so there has been a myth that HR isn't a revenue driving part of the organization, that it is something that is overhead. It's really busy work. It's sort of things that are bolted on to managers every day.
Yeah.
But so I was a consultant. I was a partner at Great Place to Work, and so that's the company that puts on the Fortune Top 100 Places to Work list.
Yep.
And one of the things that we recognized is those organizations that are perennially in the top 20. They don't believe that. Yeah. They believe that people drive success, and so human resources and the rest of the business are intertwined in a way that is not common in many organizations. And so that's the thing I really want to focus on is as an HR leader or as an HR professional, you need to be able to speak the language of the business and to be able to connect the work that you're doing to driving results. And there's easy ways to do that and to articulate that so that we're not thinking about HR like the like Catbird in Dilbert,
Right.
right? We're not thinking about HR like that. We're thinking about them as a partner in really accelerating the growth of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to pivot into talking about how you do the work you do with these HR professionals. But before we get there, um, do you have a tidbit of advice for those listeners who are running their own company? They're premature in actually putting an HR infrastructure in place. How do they model that really good behavior of seeing their people as a resource, before they're big enough to have folks sort of dedicated to that? Any insights or advice for a smaller organization?
Well, yeah. So I think I got some great advice from a leader at AT&T, and she said that you want to treat people like you want to be treated. And so as you're growing, the thing you want to focus on is, how would I want to be treated in this situation? How would I want this process to run and impact me? How easy would I want this to be? So that simple sort of thought process is a really powerful one to come from.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would probably say for organizations that are growing is to keep it really simple. The thing that makes HR and really any process in any organization difficult is when it's overcomplicated.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, there's one other thing that I just thought of, and that is to really make sure that you're communicating transparently. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we try to kind of spin things. And so as a small organization, you just want to keep it simple, communicate effectively, and think about how you'd want to be treated.
Right. That I love that, especially the transparency. And the transparency thing probably cuts in ways that most entrepreneurs don't think they do. When we talk about transparency, a lot of entrepreneurs probably focus in on don't lie to people, but it's more than that, right? It's also laying things out honestly and clearly in a way that can't be misunderstood, and making sure that you're communicating those things, because a lot of times, we believe we're being clear with people who are working for us, and we're not. They don't understand. They think things are fine, and yet we're upset. And so, our expectations as the business leader haven't been met. But instead of like getting into this conflict situation, then we start to be all passive aggressive and a bunch of other stuff. And we don't do it on purpose. I just think people aren't very good at transparent communication, because again, when they think about transparency, it's like, well, I'm not lying to anybody, but it's more than that.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think there's a lot of good ways to learn about how to do that. There's this book that I've been recommending to folks. It's called Radical Candor.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. It is remarkable. And that whole thing that you're saying about, like, I don't want to hurt people's feelings, I don't want to have conflict. But it's not about like the WWE. You're not throwing chairs and any of that kind of stuff. What you're doing is really having an open and honest conversation, just like you would with a client, just like you would with a loved one, right? That's what you want to do to make that relationship really powerful. So
that's great advice. Great advice and a great book. All right. So pivoting into the work that you do. So you are, you're selling into corporations and kind of putting them through some kind of a change process. What can you describe a little bit about the process that you take an organization through? What do they look like when you arrive? What do they look like when you are done? Now, you may not be done, but what does that transformation look like, and how can they sort of tell, yep, like he's come in here and really made things better?
Well, I think that there's three big ways that we're going to be able to showcase the difference that's being made. So one is that those HR professionals or HR leaders that I've gotten to work with, they are going to be intentionally connecting the work that they're doing to driving business results. So they're going to be talking about it like that, presenting it like that, and they're going to be focused on how are they driving key metrics that are important to business leaders, not just what's the next new thing,
Yeah.
or what's the next new technology. So that's the first thing. The second is that from that point on, the next thing that they're going to roll out is going to look very, very different. It's going to have a lot more connection to the business. It's going to be able to be communicated in a way that people are going to be excited about it. And it's not going to be a flash in the pan. It's going to be something that's going to last over time. And I think the third big thing that organizations will see and professionals will see is that there's going to be a change in the way that people leaders are focused on their people. So oftentimes in many organizations, big and small, people that manage others, they don't pay a whole lot of attention to the people that they're managing. And they focus a lot on reaching their goals.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we really help organizations do is kind of flip that a little bit, because if you're a people leader, your primary role should be leading people and letting them do the work.
Yeah.
And so those three big things organizations are going to be able to see either right away or within the first 90 days of that work taking place.
Got it. Yeah, and it's great that you've outlined these changes. You've got them sort of, outlined into different dimensions of seeing kind of how the organization adjusts. One of the things that I find a lot of consultants in the soft skills space have difficult time doing is being able to either quantify that the change has occurred or point to something and say, see, this is the result of the work that we do. Is that a challenge in any of the contracts that you have as you're working with folks, that you have to kind of point out, yep, actually there was a change and this happened, and when things are tough to quantify like they are in your space?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it can be difficult, but the thing that I'm really trying to do is to shift that conversation, because I really believe that there are tangible things that we can do to connect the work that HR does to driving business results. And so whenever I'm working with organizations, the thing that I want to do is identify a key business goal or a key business metric and attach the work that I'm doing to that. And so we're going to be able to see whether or not there's a movement in that. And usually there is, because I choose my metrics wisely.
Yeah, sure.
But sometimes there isn't. And so we have to look at, well, why? And so it's interesting, because like if you think about marketing, right? And marketing's really important. But when I was at Discover Financial Services, we would send out these mailers, right? These direct to consumer mailers.
Yep.
And if we got 0.5 or 1% back, that was a huge win.
Yeah, I was at Capital One in the direct mail, so I know
right?
We measured in basis points. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so, but there was some connection, right? There was some number that you were looking for. And so I think that one of the things that professionals, but HR professionals in particular, get a little bit nervous or squeamish around is, well, what if I don't actually make that better? Or what if that goal doesn't raise by 50% or whatever it is?
Yeah.
And so I think that we want to make sure that people are comfortable with that. So sorry, that's a long answer to your short question, but
no,
I try to tie it really hard.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a couple of things I want to point out that I think are really, really smart. Number one, you are focused on metrics. You've got a metrics oriented background, which, again, you're an engineer, so that doesn't surprise me. That's one of the things I like about engineers and more technical scientific folks is they do think about quantification even in areas where most of us wouldn't even think about quantification. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you bring up this really important point, which is, what are the expectations of improvement around those metrics? And, one of the things I find, and I don't know if you see this in your work as well, is having the discussion of what the definition of success is around those metrics up front really helps. You might be walking into a time bomb if someone thinks that, a 90-day adjustment is going to, improve effectiveness in the team by 150% or something, ridiculous. So it's important to have this conversation. So that's really good insight for anyone who's doing any kind of corporate work at all.
Yeah.
Do you find that you have pressure during the sales process to justify the investment, quantify ROI? Is that an area where you're seeing a lot more focus from corporations? They want you to justify or quantify the investment?
Absolutely. So I think that oftentimes, particularly with these sort of soft skills or not technology, whatever it is, there's always this, well, how is that going to make us more effective?
Sure.
And so, yeah, there's always all kinds of pressure around that. And I think the way to overcome that or address it is to address it with your measures of success. And so as I've kind of gone throughout my career, I've really concentrated on quantifying, well, what is the value that was created based on the work that I did?
Yeah.
And I talk about that very explicitly. And so in terms of, budget saved or increase in productivity or whatever the metric is, because it's hard to refute those kinds of numbers. Now, the other thing that does happen is people will say, well, sure, you did that, but there were other factors involved. Yeah. And so, right, the answer to that is, of course, right? Life is not that simple.
Right.
But minus that intervention or the work that I did, they definitely wouldn't have achieved the level of results that they did. So, right. But yeah, I do find that a lot. You just got to be ready for it, right? You got to have a couple of things in the can to be able to say right away.
Yeah. Look, it doesn't surprise me that that's part of your marketing practice. The reason I bring it up now is because a lot of people who are listening to this sell into corporations and have a very difficult time with this part of it because they, I don't know, it's almost like there's this myth that it's like buzzword marketing, like you'd be able to come in and say, well, I do 360 degree assessments. And right. Suddenly it's like, oh, well, yeah, the CEO read an article in a newspaper about, on the airplane about 360 degree assessments. And so now that's what we're buying today. Like it doesn't work that way, generally speaking. You have to have a much more quantitative approach to how you're going to impact that organization. And one of the biggest mistakes I see corporate consultants make that are not in the, I guess, sales and marketing space or the revenue generation or expense saving space directly is being able to quantify things. And of course, the numbers are soft, and of course, they're all assessment or assumptions. But I see really good consultants be able to have those pieces in place and walk through some kind of a value model. And even if you say, fine, like cut my estimate of productivity in half.
Right.
It's a ridiculously smart investment for you to make. That is so much more powerful. It's going to really bring you to the top. If an organization's considering a number of different consultants, or if they're deciding between hiring you or, all of the other priorities that they have that really can make all the difference in the world. So that's really, really, really smart.
Thank you.
Great stuff. All right, so we're running a little bit short on time. I have a question I want to ask you before we move on, though. So in building up a corporate practice, a corporate consultative practice, what would you have wished someone told you before you got started that would have saved you a lot of hassle and headache that you might share?
Yeah, so I think, and I like to think in threes. So I think there's three things I would say.
Okay.
So one is that it takes time. So, right, you can't just call into a bunch of companies and then all of a sudden replace your salary. Like that doesn't work.
Right.
I think the second thing is that you have to be really clear about what it is that you're selling. You have to be very focused and targeted, and you can't be all things to all people. And so early in my consulting career, if somebody called me and asked me if I could do something, my answer was yes, no matter what it was they were asking me to do. So that's the second thing. I think the third thing is that you want to make sure that you are creating some level of expertise as you're going into organizations, because people in those organizations, they are good stewards of their budget and they are good stewards of their time. And so you have to understand what it is that you are bringing to the table, or else they're going to show you the door. And or they're going to do it nicely and say, well, we're going to think about it, or whatever it is that they're going to do. So I think those are the three big things I wish that somebody had given me a lot more insight about. I had to learn that the hard way.
Oh, they're so good. Like I love every single one of those. In particular, there's this myth, I guess, that consulting is easy because if you're just a smart person, you can go solve a whole bunch of problems. Like, and I've had people give me that bad advice. Oh, Frank, like you can do a lot of different stuff. Don't shoehorn yourself into one area, leave yourself open to do lots of different things. And I have found that's a horrible piece of advice. People want specialists. They want a clear understanding of what you do for an organization and how you do it. And they want you to come in with a plan, as opposed to this classic, consulting framework, which is, oh, well, we're going to come in and we're going to look for problems, and then we're going to give you a gap analysis, and then we're going to go solve the problems. Like, no one wants to hear that anymore. Quick story. I was dressed down very badly from an executive vice president of an $8 billion software company one time when I made a call in, and I got the CEO of an $8 billion company on the phone. So I had done all the hard work, the heavy lifting to get in. And then when he and his VP of sales asked me, so what are you going to do for us? And I gave the standard, well, you got to come in and take a look under the covers. And I was very good for me that he did not just say thanks, but no thanks. He dressed me down and told me exactly the mistake I had made. And I am grateful for that dressing down, because it taught me a huge lesson about communicating consulting services to organizations. Like, have your crap together, like know what it is you're going to do and have a plan going in, do your research, understand the organization. And that was really amazing. So thanks for sharing that advice. That's great advice. Really appreciate it. All right. So before we take off, for those people who are listening, they want to connect with you, learn more about what you do, hear more about your expertise, your background. What's a great way for them to connect to you?
Well, I think they can go to my website, which is www.cube214.com, or they can just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. And so, and I happen to be in Denver. I'm one of the only Anil Saxenas in Denver. So it's easy to find me.
You've got a phone book. Yeah.
Right. So those are probably the two best ways to contact me. And if they're really interested in getting started with something right away, go to my website, email me, and we'll set up some time to talk. And I'm happy to set up 15 to 30 minutes just to do some free exploration and see what's possible and see if we might be good partners together.
Great. That's amazing. Thank you. That's a generous offer. And link to your website and your LinkedIn profile are below the video. They're also on the show notes page. If you're out and about listening to the audio, come on back to the show notes page. You can click right on through to connect with Anil. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been really, really helpful, really interesting. And just from someone who also has done a lot of corporate consulting work, I'll tell the audience, you clearly know what you're talking about, because you're talking about all the right stuff about creating success in organizations and contracts. So thanks for sharing that with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been great.
Yeah. And thanks for being with us on the 6 to 7 Figure Show. I've been your host, Frank Bria. And just a quick reminder about the high ticket program Core Offer Black Book. Contains more than 60 pages of standard operating procedures, how to run your coaching, consulting, or expert-based service business. You can download that for free. The show's homepage, 6to7.show. That's 6to7.show for your free Black Book. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you on the next episode of 6 to 7 Figure Show. Make it happen.